They called her just a maid, then she saved the alien throne. The poison was already inside the walls. I knew because I put my hand against the ventilation pipe at 9:30 in the evening and felt the faint vibration of a secondary pump that had no reason to be running. No one else would have noticed, but I had been listening to those pipes for 6 years. I knew every sound they made the way a mother knows her child's breathing in the dark. My name is Clara Webb. I am 29 years old, originally from a small city in northern England, and for the last 6 years I have cleaned the floors of the imperial palace of Velkorath Prime. I am, by every official record in the Empire's vast and ancient bureaucracy, a domestic attendant third class, a maid. The Velkari do not think much of maids. They do not think much of humans at all, if I am being fair about it. We were admitted into the Velkorath Imperium 41 years ago as a client species, which is a polite way of saying we were allowed inside the door as long as we carried something useful. We were good with our hands. We could withstand temperatures and confined spaces that made the insectoid Velkari uncomfortable. We were adaptable in ways their biology simply was not. So they let us in, they put us to work, and then for the most part they stopped looking at us altogether. That was their mistake. When you are invisible, you see everything. I had been watching Counselor Vethrak for 4 months, not because anyone asked me to, not because I had any training in intelligence work or any authority whatsoever to investigate a member of the High Imperial Council. I watched him because the corridor outside his private office was on my Tuesday rotation, and one evening in late autumn I noticed that the hem of his ceremonial robe was wet. It had not rained. The fountains in that wing had been shut off for repairs. There was no water source that should have touched his robe. 2 weeks later, the same thing. Wet hem, dry palace. I started paying attention in a different way after that. I began noting small things in a pocket notebook I kept inside my cleaning cart. The Velkari never look inside a cleaning cart. Why would they? It is beneath their interest. So my notebook sat there, safely invisible, filling up with dates and times and small observations that meant nothing on their own, but together began to form a shape I did not like. A particular ventilation shaft on sublevel 3 smelled faintly of a compound I recognized from a chemistry module I had taken during my first year of palace orientation. The module covered hazardous substances that human staff needed to identify for safety purposes. The compound was called Velsareth 9 in the training material, a neural sedative used in Velkari medical practice, extremely concentrated forms of which could cause full cardiac arrest in any warm-blooded species within minutes of atmospheric exposure. The shaft connected, through a series of branches I had memorized because fixing blocked pipes was part of my job, to the Imperial Dining Hall. I tried to tell someone in October, a junior administrative officer named Greaves, who handled staff complaints. He did not look up from his desk. He told me to attend to my duties, and that if I had concerns about air quality, I could submit a maintenance request through the standard form, which would be reviewed within 30 working days. I submitted the form. I heard nothing. In November, I managed to get a written note to Guard Captain Clara, who commanded the Empress's personal security detail. Clara was old and scarred, and had the look of someone who had survived things that would have ended lesser beings. I had enormous respect for her. My note was intercepted by a younger guard who assumed it was a shift change request and filed it accordingly. By December, I had stopped trying to tell anyone and started making plans on my own. The Integration Summit had been scheduled for months. Representatives from Earth's Governing Council were coming to Velkorath Prime to negotiate expanded human rights within the Imperium. It was the largest diplomatic event involving humanity since our admission 41 years ago. Every senior Velkari official would attend the formal dinner. The Empress herself, Velsorath III, ruler of 1,000 star systems, would sit at the head of the table. The device in the ventilation shaft would activate at the 4th bell of the evening, which corresponded to roughly 9 o'clock by human reckoning. The poison would disperse through the atmospheric system and reach the dining hall within 4 minutes. Everyone inside would be dead within 10. It would look like a human assassination. The Earth delegation, conveniently seated at the table, would be blamed. The Imperium would have its justification for whatever it wished to do to humanity next. I found all of this out on the evening of the summit while doing my standard sub-level maintenance check, because I am the only person in this palace who crawls into the infrastructure tunnels voluntarily. I am small. I have good hands. I do not find enclosed spaces frightening. I found the device at 9:17 in the evening, 43 minutes before the fourth bell. It was a beautiful piece of engineering, honestly. Compact, sealed, wired into the pipe network with components that matched the surrounding infrastructure so closely that a visual inspection would have missed it entirely. The cipher on the housing casing was one I had seen before, on documents sitting open on a desk, while I cleaned around the person reading them without sparing me a glance. It was Vethorak's administrative cipher. I had recognized it in my notebook 4 months ago, and written it down because writing things down is what I do. I could not disarm it. I want to be clear about that. I am not a bomb disposal expert. I had no tools for something that precise and no confidence that touching the wrong component would not trigger an early release, so I did not try to disarm it. Instead, I thought about pipes. I had spent 6 years learning how this palace breathed. I had replaced seals and cleared blockages and rerouted pressure systems, and done 100 small repairs that kept the building functioning without anyone ever thanking me or knowing my name. I understood the ventilation network the way a musician understands an instrument. And what I understood in that moment was this: the device needed the pipe to deliver its payload. Remove the pipe from the equation, and the device becomes a sealed container that poisons only itself. The junction between the device's feed line and the main atmospheric branch was 12 meters back toward the service corridor. It was a standard Velkari pressure fitting, the kind I had disconnected and reconnected probably 200 times. I had the wrench on my cart. I had a secondary coupling I carried as a spare, because the fittings on sub-level 3 were old and prone to failure. I disconnected the feed line in 6 minutes. I capped the main branch with the spare coupling. The device, when it activated, would fill a sealed section of pipe with concentrated neural sedative that would go absolutely nowhere. The dining hall's atmospheric system would continue running on the secondary feed from the east junction, which I had quietly opened before leaving the tunnel, because I had planned for exactly this contingency 3 weeks ago when I first started mapping the possible scenarios. I will not pretend I was calm. My hands were shaking when I climbed out of the access tunnel. My heart was doing something that did not feel entirely healthy. But I had spent 4 months being afraid, and I had made my peace with it somewhere around November, in a small room in the staff quarters, staring at my notebook and understanding what was coming. I had 40 minutes, enough time to do the second part. There is a route through this palace that only I know, not because it is secret exactly, but because it passes through 3 service corridors, a linen storage room on the 4th floor, and a maintenance shaft behind the east garden wall, none of which appear on any map that a dignitary or a guard would ever consult. I had used it dozens of times to move quickly between wings without disrupting the court's daily movement. Tonight I used it to reach the Empress's private corridor in 11 minutes. The guard at the door was a young Velkari soldier named, as far as I could determine from 6 years of observing staff rotations, something unpronounceable that I had privately translated as the tall one on Wednesdays. He raised his weapon the moment he saw me. A human in the private corridor at this hour was so far outside normal parameters that his reaction was entirely reasonable. "I need to speak to the Empress," I said, in high imperial Velkari. "This is not a request. There is a device in the sub-level ventilation system that will kill everyone in the dining hall in 38 minutes, and Counselor Vethorak's cipher is on the housing casing. You can detain me after she has heard what I know." He stared at me. I waited. 2 more guards arrived from the adjacent corridor. I said it all again, same words, same pace, because I had rehearsed this speech in my head every night for 3 months. They did not let me go, but they did bring Guard Captain Clara. Clara looked at me the way she looked at everything, without expression, without urgency, with the focused stillness of someone who had been making life-and-death decisions for 40 years and had learned not to waste energy on reaction. She looked at the casing I had brought out of the tunnel. She looked at the cipher on it. She said one word to the tall guard, something short and final, and he disappeared down the corridor at a run. Then she looked at me again. "You will come inside," she said. "You will speak clearly and you will not stop until you have said everything." The Empress's private sitting room was nothing like what I had imagined in the 6 years I had cleaned the corridors outside it. It was smaller, quieter. There were no thrones, no grandeur, no symbols of power on the walls. There was a low table, several cushioned resting platforms designed for Valkyrie anatomy, and a single lamp casting amber light across the room. The Empress herself was standing when I entered, which I gathered was unusual, because Clara's posture shifted in a way I had learned to read as surprise. Velsarath III was ancient. I do not know exactly how old. Old enough that the compound eyes common to her species had taken on a depth that made them look, from certain angles, almost reflective. She was tall, far taller than me, with the elongated limbs of the Valkyrie ruling caste and the particular stillness of someone who had never needed to hurry for anything in her life. She looked at me for a long time without speaking. I spoke. I told her everything. Not quickly, not breathlessly, but clearly in order the way I had planned it. 4 months of dates, Vetharak's wet robe, the ventilation compound, the maintenance request that went unanswered, the note to Clara that was filed as a shift change form, the device's location, its components, its cipher, its timing, what I had done to the feed line and why, the secondary coupling, the east junction, the 4th bell. When I finished, the room was completely silent. Clara's communicator buzzed. She answered it, listened, and said 4 words I did not entirely catch. Then she looked at the Empress and gave a very small nod. They had found the device. They had found my work on the feed line. And somewhere in the palace, at that exact moment, I later learned, the 4th bell rang and nothing happened in the dining hall except that 37 officials continued eating their dinner without knowing that the air around them was, for the first time that evening, entirely safe. Vetharak was taken from the table by 6 guards while his wine glass was still in his hand. 3 other members of his circle were removed from the room within the following 2 minutes. I understand the arrest was efficient and quiet enough that the Earth delegation initially assumed it was some kind of ceremonial Valkyrie custom and began politely applauding. I sat in the corridor outside the Empress's sitting room for 2 hours, still holding my wrench, before anyone came to tell me what would happen next. What happened next was that Clara escorted me back inside. The Empress was seated now. She looked at me with those ancient reflective eyes and asked me a single question in high imperial Valkyrie, which I will translate as closely as I can. "You attempted to bring this to the attention of palace officials. Twice. Why did you continue acting alone after they did not respond?" I thought about the answer for a moment, not because I did not know it, but because I wanted to say it right. Because the people in that dining hall were still going to die whether anyone believed me or not, I said, and I was the only one who knew where the pipe was. The Empress was quiet for a long time after that, long enough that I started to wonder whether I had said something wrong, whether there was some cultural dimension to my answer that I had missed. Then she spoke again, and what she said was addressed to Clara, not to me, and it was too fast for me to follow completely. But I caught the phrase for oversight failure and the phrase for systemic correction, and the word that in high imperial Valkyrie means something like, "This cannot happen again." 3 weeks later, an imperial decree was issued. In Velkari, it had a name about 40 syllables long that I could not reproduce if I tried. In the human diplomatic summaries, it was recorded as the Velsorath Access Provision. What it said in plain terms was that all palace staff, regardless of species or rank, had the legal right to formal security audience in any matter they believed constituted a threat to imperial safety. The request could not be filed, delayed, or redirected. It had to be heard. It was a small change, one clause in a document that would be buried in 10,000 years of imperial legal record. It did not make humans citizens. It did not grant us fleets or planets or equal standing in the council chambers. Some people back on Earth, when word got out, said it was not enough. They were right that it was not enough. But it was a crack in the wall, and walls come down one crack at a time. Sierra walked me back to the staff quarters that night herself. She did not have to do that. It was far beneath the duties of a guard captain to escort a maid through the service corridors. She did it anyway, and she did not explain why. At the door to my room she stopped. She stood there for a moment in the way she had, that focused stillness, and then she said something in high imperial Velkari that I had to look up afterward because I had never heard it spoken aloud before, only read it once in a cultural reference guide during my first year of palace orientation. It is a phrase used between Velkari soldiers after they have survived something together. It does not translate perfectly. The closest English equivalent is something like, "I see you now." But that does not fully capture it, because in Velkari the phrase carries the weight of everything that came before it. It implies that you were present before and not truly seen, and that the seeing now is a correction of something that should have happened sooner. It is an acknowledgement of the failure and the change at once. She said it to me, then she walked away. I looked it up when I got inside. I sat on the edge of my bed in the small room I had lived in for 6 years, with my notebook on my knee and my wrench still on the floor where I had dropped it, and I read the definition 3 times. Then I put the notebook in my cleaning cart, which was parked by the door, because I was back on rotation in the morning. My friend Liam found me in the East Corridor the next day. He had heard something, the way you always hear something in a palace, half rumor and half truth filtered through a dozen translations. He looked at me with the expression of someone who had not fully decided whether to believe what he was about to say. "Did you actually save the Empress?" I thought about the ventilation shaft, the wet robe in October, the note that became a shift change form, the 200 fittings I had disconnected and reconnected over 6 years, the wrench. "I fixed a pipe," I said, "and I talked fast." He stared at me for another few seconds. Then we went back to work, because the bioluminescent stone in the North Corridor does not polish itself. Here is what I want you to understand. I am not remarkable. I did not arrive in this palace with special skills or secret training or any quality that set me apart from the other humans sweeping floors and carrying linens in the great buildings of an empire that did not particularly want to see us. I arrived with a wrench, a notebook, and 6 years of paying attention to things that no one important thought were worth paying attention to. That is what humans do. We show up. We learn the systems. We fix the things that break. We write things down. We notice the sound that is slightly wrong in a pipe that has been running fine for a decade. We keep notebooks in cleaning carts where nobody looks because we have learned, across a long and complicated history, that the powerful do not always listen, and so the careful must be ready to act alone. They called me just a maid, and they were right. I was exactly a maid, someone who knows where every corridor leads, someone who has touched every pipe and every fitting and every seal in the building, someone who has been on her knees long enough to see what moves underneath the surface of things. The Empire did not need someone with a weapon or a title or a seat at the council table. It needed someone who had been invisible long enough to know everything. We are still here, we were always here, and we are paying very close attention.